Hello and welcome to the Reversing Diabetes with Delane MD podcast. This is a special episode where we are meeting with somebody who's agreed, with a woman who has agreed to do a coaching podcast so that you can see what coaching is like. You can understand what that looks like in practice. For those of you who are new to the podcast, I am Delane Vaughn. I'm a board certified family practice doctor. I'm a former emergency room nurse. I'm a veteran healthcare provider and the host of this podcast. This podcast is for women who are not ready to let go of their longevity, their vitality, and their vigor. It's for women who know that life is a gift and they see type 2 diabetes as a risk to that gift. They're not ready to start the downward spiral of letting it go. This podcast is for badass women that do 100 other really hard things in their life but can't seem to master chocolate cake. If that's you, let's talk. Before we get started, I do want to remind you that if you are on medications for your type 2 diabetes, you have been medicated because of the way you have eaten in the past. If you change the way you eat, you're going to have to change your medications. You're going to want to get a line of communication open with your medical provider so you can share with them your blood sugar readings and they can share with you feedback for what to do with your medications. Make sure you do that so you don't get very sick, the kind of sick that involves hospitalizations, ER visits, possibly even death. Don't do that. I also want to remind you, there are reversal assessment calls. So reverse your diabetes assessment calls. Please sign up for those. What you're gonna see on this podcast is exactly what we do in one of those calls. We get really clear on what your personal obstacles are and why you haven't been able to overcome them, and so that you can see where the issue is so you can start to make some ground on reversing your type 2 diabetes. If you're interested in that point, after our call, about hearing more about my group and how you can get some personalized coaching help, that will be available to you also in those reverse your diabetes assessment calls. Go to www.calendly, that's calendly.com/DelaneMD, and you can sign yourself up on my schedule, or you can email me, Delane@DelaneMD.com. Okay, I'm going to welcome our guest on. All right, we're back, and I would like to welcome Judi to the podcast. Welcome, Judi. I'm so grateful you're here to do this for us.
Oh, thank you for letting me in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, we spoke a little bit before we started recording, and so there are a couple of questions, kind of science questions, or at least one that I can answer about kind of now that my A1C is normalized, is it okay, to have a splurge meal or a joy eat, as I call it, and kind of what that looks like. And then the other question that you had on those lines is, do you have to break up with food that's higher in carbs, or can you have it in your life as long as it's kept limited, like not a total breakup? And we'll come back to that one because I do like that question, but you always get to decide. So the science, what I do with women in the group is that once our fasting blood sugar has stayed below 100 for solid, 14 days in a row, or around 100, and sometimes it's right around 100 for whatever reason. Some women will normalize their A1C, they'll normalize their serum insulin level, they'll normalize their labs. And for whatever reason, their fasting blood sugar just kind of hovers around 100, which is fine. Some women drop to 85. That's awesome too. So once you get that kind of consistency in your fasting blood sugar over about 2 weeks, then what we do is a 75-gram carbohydrate test. So one meal, 75 grams of carbs, any kind of
Wow.
carbs you want. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, sundaes, brownies, pasta, whatever you want. Really kind of a no holds barred. In fact, I encourage you to have kind of the super processed, the more ultra or highly processed stuff, just because if you're only eating, one, 75 grams of carbs in the form of celery is a whole lot of celery. But two, I encourage you to use that thing that you're really like, I am not interested in letting go of that food for the rest of my life. I really would like to find a way I can have that in my life. That's going to be kind of, sometimes we want to only get the good blood sugars. There is far more information in the worst blood sugars you can get. So it's kind of one of those things. Don't hold back, really let yourself go within that 75-gram limit. And then what you do, you eat the 75 grams, you eat it in one meal, and then you test your blood sugar at 30 minutes, at 60 minutes, at 90 minutes, at 120 minutes. You should see a spike, and you should see at 120 it goes down. This goes back to the idea that insulin resistance is not defined by a specific number. It's a functional definition, meaning like it is a definition of how well are your cells functioning in the presence of insulin. Are they doing what they're supposed to do when insulin is around? And the only way you know that is by getting a huge surge of insulin and seeing if they're opening up and bringing that blood sugar inside and burning it off. Okay. So
Okay.
that's kind of, can I have a splurge every day? Really, until you see that information, every day, not you didn't ask every day a splurge, but once in a while a splurge, you won't know if your biology has kind of healed enough until you get that information. Okay. If you're still having fasting blood sugars in the 115 range, you're probably not healed enough. And so if every time that you have a splurge, it's going to be a step backwards. Not an entire erasing of all the work you've done, but definitely a step backwards. Okay.
So does that make a difference that I was considered pre-diabetic and not type 2 diabetic yet? So I don't test my blood
Yeah.
sugar every day. I just have my routine blood work done, with my doctor. So, and
It
that's been
is
that's been
harder.
80s for fasting.
What has your A1C been?
My A1C went from 6.4 in January
Mhm.
to my last A1C was done early summer, and that was at 5.4.
Okay. Okay. So we know that still, even at 5.4, there might be some insulin resistance, but less likely. Certainly, doctors get excited and want to high five you when you're 5.6, right? And we definitely know that there's probably still insulin resistance there. It
Right,
does make it harder to know because, of course, you can be on the edge, right? And
right,
this function of insulin. So if your cells are pretty healed up, and then you eat pasta or a sundae or a brownie or whatever, and you get a huge surge of insulin, if your cells are just kind of on that fence, they might get stunned back into insulin resistance.
okay.
Okay. And then you have to give your cells time to heal from that before you can go back and re-stun them or re-challenge them, really. Okay.
Well, I have the capability of testing. My husband tests because he's type 2 diabetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I shared with you prior, but so he tests his every morning just to
Yeah.
keep track of it. So I easily have access to that. So I could do what
Yeah.
you
I
suggest.
would totally, that's just where you're going to get the most sophisticated information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically it's like splurging at 75. I mean, 75 carbs is more than I've been eating in an entire day.
Yes. Yeah.
So when it's on, so doing that, then I should see a recovery within
2 hours,
100
it should be
minutes.
below
Okay.
130.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you can. And so how often, I think is kind of the question, how often can I have a splurge? How often, I call them joy eats. How often can I use food for the mere joy of it, not for any biological function,
Right.
right?
And I laughed because I watched your podcast on breaking up with food. And the whole time I'm listening, I'm thinking, yep, okay, yep, I know that, yep, I understand that. Is it okay once you're like leveled off and your all your levels are in a really good place consistently for like several months? Can you have a one night stand?
And that's where it's kind of like, where is your brain? Just
Right,
exactly like a one night stand would be, right? Like, if
right.
talking to the ex-boyfriend then ruminates your brain into everything and creates all of it again, like, gosh, you can, but you're going to have to deal with the aftermath of it, right? It's the same thing. I always tell women, like, you can go on vacation, you can go on a cruise, have it all, enjoy it. We can fix it when you come home. Like, there's nothing we can't fix.
Hmm.
There's nothing that's permanent. How much do you want to have the results of that is really what it comes down to. And are you sure you understand entirely what you're purchasing, what you're exchanging, right? I'm exchanging having this joyful experience in my mouth and maybe an hour afterwards for me at least, for like 3 days of jonesing for the food. And for me, a lot of times I'm like, it's I mean, I'll do it over like the holidays and my birthday. They all go together. So But come January, man, I'm like, let's get out of this. I don't like who I am thinking about. I don't like how much energy I spend with that. So, and that's where it's like you get to decide.
Well, and that's where I am right now because my
Mhm.
husband and I had like, I don't know, 5, 6 weeks of special occasions
Yeah.
on the weekends, and it was summer, and summer you kind of let go a little bit anyway. But
Mhm.
those 5, 6 weeks, we haven't been tracking, we haven't been careful, we've been splurging a lot more and everything. And we're just having such a hard time, both of us, just getting back on track. And the worst part of it is now I'm craving stuff that I hadn't craved in months.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me what it means when you're off track. Give me hard data. Like I ate processed foods, which you and I think would probably agree that is anything from a bag, a box that's, flour based, that's got sugar in it. I ate processed foods how many times a week? Since what time? Give me some hardcore data here.
I mean, most of it is snacking type stuff. My husband and I are both crazy about ice cream, and summer, prime ice cream, and we can sabotage each other. The other, neither one of us is feeling super strong, and the other one's like, oh, ice cream sounds really good, and we both give in.
Hmm.
So it's that kind of thing. It's it actually hasn't been a lot of like what I would call like bad eating. We just haven't been tracking as carefully. I haven't been eating as low a carbs, and portions have been bigger. So I know my carbs have gone up a lot. Um, just because we haven't been as careful with that kind
Okay.
of thing.
So it's not
But
necessarily like you're down in a box of Twinkies every week or something, but more that what
no,
carbs are you eating?
carbs to us are, well, like I said, popcorn and ice cream are my food nemesis. I mean,
How
and popcorn,
frequently are you having popcorn and ice cream in a week? If
um,
you put both of those together, how many instances?
probably once or twice a week, which I
Okay.
wasn't at all before.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and popcorn, especially, like I just eat too much of it.
Okay.
A little bit is not satisfying to me. They're like, to me, popcorn is like potato chips for some people,
Yeah.
where they just
Yeah.
stop. Where like we don't eat a lot of processed foods other than
Mhm.
that. Um, like, and my husband is addicted to Diet Coke, which I know you can relate to.
My
And he
people.
tried to give that up for a while, and now he's on the struggle bus with that. And
Yeah.
just things like, I had a stressful week a couple Fridays ago, and I texted my husband and said, we're going out for pizza because, it used to be, oh, let's go out for a drink after work and just relax. Well, we've cut out alcohol too. So
Hmm.
it's like, I just feel like, oh my gosh, I have like no crutch,
Yeah.
for breastfeeding,
Oh, okay.
and that's part of it. It's like, oh my gosh, food, having a drink with my husband, and neither one of us were ever big drinkers, so it's not like an out of control thing. But have meeting for a drink after work or something, and relaxing after a stressful week, or having it with dinner, or just having food as a stress relief was that was my that's my always been my go-to, even as a kid. I mean, I've struggled. I mean, my background. I've struggled with weight since I was little,
Yeah.
and food has always been my comfort.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I
So,
struggle when I'm not drinking and I'm
yeah.
not supposed to eat stuff. It's like, oh, and I'm stressed.
Yeah. When you're having thoughts that you're off track or that you're not tracking, like how does that feel when you have the getting remotivated after being on for a while, but after being not on for a while? How does that feel when you think that? I need to get remotivated since I've been off track.
I feel very much like a failure when I get
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
Like I've totally let myself down. And once again, for the millionth time in my life, I've let myself down and I'm a failure.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that the question, because that's clearly not going to benefit you, but the question becomes like, why did you go off track?
Um, like I said,
No crutch.
special occasions
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
early celebrating is a theme for me. Like, I get to a point, I had lost 40 pounds since January. My clothes were fitting great. I had some clothes that were too big, were becoming too big. And I was feeling really good. I was actually seeing myself in pictures and thinking, hey, I don't look bad. Like that's because that's always my gauge. I feel okay about myself until I see myself in pictures. And I was just to a point where like I was starting to feel good about myself and what I was doing for myself, and my body felt really good. And then it becomes like we went to Chicago for a weekend. It's like, oh, okay, we can splurge because we're going away on a little mini vacation and stuff like that. And then the next week there was something else. And the next week there was something else. And so it was kind of like,
So
yeah,
I guess,
early
yeah,
celebration for
it
sure.
sounds like there were two phases. Like there was an agreement that you were willing to make. Like I'm going, like there's these events and I'm gonna splurge. I'm gonna have, I mean, I did it. I was also in Chicago this summer and I ate Chicago pizza because that's what I do. And I have like horrible reaction with gluten, but I'm willing to make that exchange because that pizza is delicious, right?
Right.
So like there are experiences where you're willing to make an exchange. And it sounds like maybe those 6 weeks of events, at least on some level, you were willing to make the exchange.
Yeah. And I think part of our issue was that there was so much all at once,
Hmm.
because there were occasions like my husband's birthday is in May. And so we went out for a nice dinner and, we got dessert and that kind of thing. But then the difference was it was that one occasion, then we got right back on track.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the deal that we made with each other and even with our physician. We go to the same doctor, the same internist. And that was kind of a discussion that we had with him at our separate appointments, that, he was, rah rah cheering for our success, which was awesome. And he said, now, how are you going to maintain this?
Mhm.
Because it is, what we were doing was quite restrictive. And um,
Mm.
so kind of our mental agreement with each other was that, okay, when we have special occasions, we're going to not go crazy, but, let ourselves enjoy food. And then when we have control again at home, we're going to go right back on. And we did really well with that until about the end of July. And
So
that's
what's
when we
been
had,
different though?
what do you mean?
What
Like now,
happened in the end of July that's made it different?
so many things. I think we had so many occasions close together that it just kind of became a continuous splurge.
Hmm.
And now we're to the point where, we're both teachers, we're both back to school full time, and which is great. It actually makes it easier. Summer being home, I think, is harder. There's just too much opportunity where our schedules at school are so busy that, I barely get 20 minutes for a lunch. So, I don't have that temptation. But it is hard because now, like I mentioned before, I'm to the point where now we splurge for so long and those old habits come back so easily that I
Okay.
myself just back in that old habit where, I'm like, okay, tomorrow I'm on again. Tomorrow I'm tracking and I write everything down and I get it all figured out. And by 6 o'clock at night, I've blown it.
Yeah. Why have you blown it? Give me an example of the 6 p.m. at night that you've blown it.
I think part of it is returning to the stress of school,
Hmm.
and part of it, and not having that go-to thing other than food. Like I want to eat the whole house the second I walk through the door.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing is the cravings are back
Yeah.
after splurge for so long. So my
Yeah.
brain, going along with your live thing this morning that I
Today.
listened to, my brain, I'm fighting my brain because my brain is
Mhm.
like, you want that. Ooh, it'll taste so good and you need it. You're stressed. My brain is winning right now.
Yes. So there's a few things going on here. One is, your brain offers you the answer to that you have to answer stress with something. And food is the habit and the practice that you have made.
For
So
sure.
whenever you have the feeling of stress and you believe you need to fix the stress, your brain is going to always offer you food. What's wrong with being stressed?
It's just not a good feeling.
Mhm. Right.
I want to
But the
relax.
feeling
And
of
I know
being
I could probably guess what the answer is.
yeah,
It's just
the
fighting
feeling
with
of
that
being
voice.
disappointed though, and feeling like you're not on track, also not a good feeling.
No, that's true. That's
Your
just as
brain
bad
is
as
offering you that there
stress.
is something you can do to feel good about a scenario, right? And
Right.
maybe there are some things you can do, but do you think that there is ever going to be a reality where you're not stressed at work?
No,
Okay. So if there's never going to be a reality where that's going to happen, how do you want to manage your stress?
I need to find something different when I walk through the door.
Yeah, or, do you need to get really good at feeling stressed? Ah, God, Delane, you have the worst ideas ever.
I don't want to be stressed.
Right. But I would challenge that. I would challenge that because a lot of times we believe we don't want to be stressed, but why you're stressed is because you believe in what you're doing. You're stressed because you care.
Yep.
I'll tell you the teachers that aren't stressed, they don't care. They don't
Yeah.
care,
Yep.
right? That can
Yep.
happen. You can not be stressed. It's just not the human you're that aligns with your authenticity, with who you are. So do you really want to not be stressed about the things that are important to you?
No, because I want to care about them.
So that's probably the puzzle for you to solve is like I'm going to feel stress here. Like I don't need to make it go away. I can just manage it and go about my day, make the planned food that I have, make the things that I've already planned out for myself and go from there, carrying the stress. The fact of the matter is the pizza doesn't undo the stress.
No, it just tastes so darn good.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. For a minute, it's definitely distracting, right? But
right.
the interesting component I want you to see, and this is the funny thing about the brain, even in the summer when you didn't have school, you were struggling. Like that's when the 6 week party
Yeah.
started. That you need the food for stress is a story your brain tells you to keep you eating the food that makes your brain happy.
Good point. All right, you get a point on that one.
Yeah.
One
And
point to Lane.
I see this in women, and you get to decide again, like, and that's why I want you to kind of normalize the idea of being stressed. It's totally okay for you to have a feeling you don't want. It's totally okay. And like, I don't enjoy the feeling, but it is authentic to what's happening in my life, right? Like, maybe it's not the best and the most fun feeling, but it's what's really happening. And so can I hold space for that thing that's what's really happening and not try to fix it with something that doesn't fix it and create some disappointment in the future, right?
So then, do I try to find an alternative thing when I'm feeling that stress when I get home from work,
I think
rather
that,
than, and
yeah,
don't get me wrong. Like, yeah, I walk through the door and it's like, I'll say to my husband, oh, I just need something to take the edge off. And yeah, I'm eating almonds. I eat, a little cup full of almonds, but the difference is like I'm eating too many almonds. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you can have too much of a good thing, right?
Uh,
So,
Even sunshine burns if you get too much. Absolutely.
right.
So I would tell you, one, I think that the first step is to sit with the feeling, like the feeling of stress and overwhelm, like that I need to take the edge off. I want you to sit with the edge for a while, just so you can see what is really being told there. Like, what is really happening? the idea, I mean, sometimes just the acknowledgement, just the saying, the verbalization, even if only in your head, I am edgy because sometimes work is stressful. This is part of the career I've chosen. I choose to be stressed because I care about my job. Just acknowledging that sometimes is enough to dissipate it, to give you some release of the intensity of it. And I think that's helpful.
So
Um,
does, and can I ask you physically, does it have to do at all with like where my daytime like blood sugar is sitting? Because I've been told different things, and one of my doctors that I had seen suggested, well, maybe you need to eat like a snack in the middle of the afternoon in between your classes to level things out a little bit, or eat something on the way home to level you out a little bit, so when you get home you're not having that craving that you're not sure is stress or food
yeah.
related. Does that
So,
make sense?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I totally understand what people say, and they're not wrong. When you're insulin resistant, you definitely have fluctuations in blood sugars because your cells aren't responding appropriately. So you'll have super highs and super lows. And that definitely can stimulate some unpleasant physical feelings. If you are not medicated, you are not going to die from that.
Okay.
Okay. And the way that I always think about it is 10,000 years ago, if there wasn't almonds available for me to eat after I was done doing the job I had to do and I came back to the hut and I was stressed, would I die? Like, would anything bad happen to me?
Right.
And then I get to this calm place, then it's kind of like, well, absolutely not. I'm fine. I'm just irritated for me. Stress always comes out of here. I think most things come out, end up as irritated in my feelings wheel. But yeah, so that's kind of the thing. Now, if you think something is really truly physically wrong and you don't know, like when I have, I'm trying to think, when I have an anaphylactic reaction, the right answer is to always take my EpiPen. That's a very clear, like, I know this is the biology that's happening in my body. I know what's happening. I know how to treat it. I take my EpiPen. I go to the emergency department. That's something you know. If you have something happening in your body and you're like, my biology is wrong and I need to seek out medical care, then you need to seek out medical care, right? But if it's just like, I don't know, am I hungry or am I just irritated? Would food help? Chances are good that's your brain's clever
Yeah,
little way.
it's totally emotional, and I do know that because that's been my pattern my whole life. Like
Yeah.
even as a kid, I remember, you know, being upset about something, and I'd head in and grab a snack off the top of the refrigerator, or I was sitting there watching TV by myself. I come from a big family, very busy family. Um, sitting there watching TV by myself, I'm bored. I go in and I grab a snack off the top of the refrigerator. I mean, that's been my whole life. Is it seems like every emotion is centered around food.
How
So
food remedies
aggression
it.
is, boredom is, stress
Yes.
is, grief
Yes.
is, everything is centered around food. And it was the food that I would seek out that would make me feel better.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's
And it
what I'm
would for a
fighting.
brief time. Yeah. Right. So see that habit, that habitual component that you talked about earlier is going to come into play here. Have you ever heard me talk about dogs running a fence line and
No.
and the group?
So,
Okay. So you bring a dog into a yard and it runs the fence line, right? And initially there's grass that goes all the way up to the fence. And then the dog starts running and the grass gets patted down
mhm.
and it's flattened out and then it becomes dirt and then it becomes a deep rut, right? From over and over and over and over using that fence line. The connections in our brain that creates thoughts, feelings, and actions, that's actually an anatomical connection in our brain between cells. And the more you use them, the tighter they become, like that groove, the easier it is for your brain to run them. They become very well used. The tighter those connections are, the quicker they run. Okay. Like a dog on a fence line, if you put an obstacle in that fence line and suddenly they can't stay on that path, they will awkwardly sniff their way around sniff their way around. Every time they'll sniff their way around. And over time, they will create a new, patting down the grass, new dirt trail, new groove, right? Your
Hmm.
brain will do this also. If you give yourself an external obstacle to eating that food, which it sounds like somehow like you just were hell bent probably January through June that you weren't eating that food and you didn't care what was happening and you're like, hell no, will not go, right? Like you were a no. And that was the external stimuli that
Hmm.
forced you to awkwardly move around, right? All your brain remembers right now in this phase where you're having a hard time getting remotivated is I seem to do it so easily. You don't remember any of the awkward part, or at least it's not what we're talking about because your brain's like, why can't I go back to doing it, right?
Right.
What's happened is just like a dog in the yard. If you remove that obstacle, they will go back to the original pathway. You've removed that obstacle for 6 weeks and you've gone back to the original pathway. And now you're like, why can't I go back to the way I was doing it before? Because this is a habit. Your brain's always going to go to this habit. You need to expect this habit to travel side by side with you in your car for the rest of your life because it's who you've been for how many decades?
Yeah.
Okay. So to think that somehow the last 6 months is going to change a decade, of course you're like frustrated,
Well,
right?
and that's where the early celebration comes in because yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
forget what I was going to say, but
Yeah. So, yeah, that's exactly how this is happening for you. One, you have a belief that stress is something that needs to be remedied for you somehow, some way.
well,
And
and I
so,
know now I know what I was going to say with the early celebration. Part of the really strong pull and motivation from January through June was the fact that because my husband was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes last year and he was having a hard time getting it under control and he was on meds, they put him on metformin and he felt horrible on it, and didn't seem to make a huge difference for him. So in January we're like, and I was I was at, my A1C was 6.4 and my sugar was up to, it was like 118 or something like that. Oh no, 166. Sorry, 166. And it's like, okay, this is an issue for both of us. So we're going to have to put this on project status and hit it hardcore because this is not how we want to feel. It's not how we want to live. We're worried about our health. And it was like we were on high alert. And, in that 6 months, my A1C went to normal. My blood sugar went to totally normal. His went down to the point where they took him off metformin. Luckily, our doc is not big into meds. He is not a med pusher. He's a great guy, and so he was happy to get him off. And then my husband was able to his blood sugar actually went lower eating the way we were eating and regulating things the way we were regulating them, went lower than it did when he was on the medication.
yeah, yeah.
So basically we both kind of healed ourselves with what we were doing. And then now, because our range is still in that normal range, his blood sugar has gone up a little bit. But I think part of it too is the strong motivation and pull isn't there as much
Hmm.
because we feel like we kind of conquered that, knowing all too well, of course, that if we don't stop what we're doing right now, we're going to be
Yeah.
right back there again.
Well, and this is why your doctor asked you, what are you going to do to maintain it?
Yeah.
Because and this is where getting beneath, getting the why. Here's the, like, I want you to sit with stress every afternoon. And I do. But the fact of the matter is, you're going to have to find some way to take care of these emotions that you have that have nothing to do with food. You're going to have to implement strategies, a walk, music, a dance party, a bath, walking the dog, playing fetch with the dog, hugging your husband. You're going to have to find some other way to give you some release and create some peace in your life when stress is there. Okay. That is step two. Okay. That's what creates this long term. You can force yourself and coerce yourself to do anything for a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe even 3 years. But we are grown ass women, and I don't want to be forced to do anything.
Right.
Anything. Think of how much easier it is to do it when you just want all of it. You don't have to force or fight. It is not exhausting.
Right. And there are times I get really, quite frankly, pissed off that it's like, why do I have to,
BS. Yes.
why do I have to deal with all this when other people are just, enjoying life and eating whatever they want and doing, I don't know. It just,
So yeah, and we work on that in coaching. Like we answer
yeah,
those questions. You tell me, why do you do it and they don't? Can you answer that?
I don't know. With me, I think it's because this is the path I've been on my whole life. It's not a case where like when I had a cancer diagnosis 11 years ago, when I went through that and it threw me into early menopause. Um, it's not like, oh, all of a sudden I gained all this weight and now I'm having to deal with it and everything. I've been on this path my entire life.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so part of it, I've met other people that they haven't had to deal with it. And I'm mad at myself because I kind of set this path for myself.
Is that true?
You know that. Well, I mean, I'm the one that ate the cookies, right?
Everybody eats cookies.
You know,
So there's a couple answers to that. And I think really answering, like, why am I doing it this way and they're not? Because they don't want to do it your way. There's a part of you that wants the result of not relying on the meds. It's a part of you that wants to stress about your kids at school. There's a part of you that feels really authentic for you. You're going to have to spend some time with that and let those thoughts and feelings start running the show versus the I can't deal with the stress. I need a release. Where's the food? I have to fight this desire for food. It's so hard. It's so much work. They don't have to do it. Why do I have to do it? All of that is where you have to force yourself to do something and you won't do it forever. Nobody wants to be coerced to do something for the rest of their life, right?
right.
When you figure out, like, I mean, I could eat the cookies and just be medicated. I could do that. The reality is that's probably what everybody will end up being. You look at the studies, 9 out of 10 Americans are insulin resistant. So it's not anything special about you, friend, right? This is not what makes you special. There are special things, but this ain't it, right? So I think that answering that question feels a lot better than the frustration that comes from letting it sit in a question form, right?
Well, and I do want, I mean, a big why for me to get back on one, it was it was a huge confidence booster. Like I felt good about what I was doing for myself. And two, I felt very in control. And for me, that's a big thing because I'm a control freak. And so feeling like I had control over how my day went and what I planned for myself and everything, I think like I have to get back to the mindset that that felt better than the ice cream I had 2 nights ago tasted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part of it is getting back to that mindset. And that's fun. Like there's like a newness to it when you're first experiencing it. And that newness, that novelty is just really fun for humans. We like new things. Some point that is going to wear off and you're going to have to do it for a different reason other than it's exciting. Because like I said in the Facebook Live today, it is boring AF.
I'm that's the other thing. We're so sick of eating the same stuff over and over and over again.
It's interesting, but you would not be sick of eating the pizza over and over and over again, or
No,
the
this is
popcorn
very
over
true.
and over and
This is
over
very
again,
true.
or the ice cream. But we tell ourselves, like, I don't have any variety. Well, I don't have any variety. I mean, I always got the same ice cream too. always. Like there was no variety
Good,
there.
good point.
That's a story we tell ourselves. So I would encourage you, one, to start to spend time with stress and start answering these questions that your brain brings up to you. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to eat this way all the time? It's so boring. Start answering those. And then after you get some really good clarity about why I'm feeling stressed, why I'm thinking this way, then you can start to decide whether you want to keep it or not. Because it's always all the thoughts are optional. Like, and some of them I want to keep. Like some of them are cruddy and I want to keep, right? Like they're all optional. And some of them I want to keep. And some of them I don't. And so that's where you then start to kind of get different ways of dealing with it. Okay. The other thing I want to encourage you, whereas your brain has wrapped up, especially from a lifetime of this yo-yo, this experience of striving and striving and striving to get control
Mm.
over this eating, your brain has built up that all the fun, all the jazz hands in the world come with food. The gift of this work, at least where I'm concerned, the gift of this work is the robustness that you add to your life from no longer relying on food to do all those things. Okay. Start thinking of you 5 years from now, weight where you want it, no risk of diabetes. You've had a normal A1C for 3 years running. You don't struggle with it. It's just real steady Eddie, even Steven. What are you doing day to day? How do you handle coming home from work stressed? How do you handle when you're bored? What are you doing? That's where you're going to find a lot of answers to some of the questions that you're having. Is that helpful?
Very,
Yeah. What do
very.
you think about all that?
Just, yeah, it's, yeah. You hit on a lot of important points of the emotionalness of, for me, for eating. It's so key and always has been for me. Um, yeah, I'll have to think through what I replace that with and how I deal with those emotions without grabbing that cup of
Yeah.
almonds.
And even give yourself permission. Like I said, like maybe I don't need to do anything about it. Maybe I can just sit and feel this way. Maybe that's not going to actually be the end of me. Nobody's going to actually spontaneously combust. I feel
No,
these feelings. But our brain presents it to us like something like that might happen, you know?
right,
So, yeah, give yourself permission again to feel awkward so you can start reconnecting some different neural grooves. Okay. Um, yeah, let me know how that goes.
yeah, and I love your dog perimeter analogy. To me, I can that just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So I
When
have
you
to I have to put up that barrier and start looping around again.
Yeah. And recognize like a lot of times you won't even know the emotional cause of what's driving you to whatever food it is unless you give yourself the expectation that you're not going to eat it, right? If you know when you come home tonight or whenever that you're not going to have a handful of almonds, no matter how stressed you are, like there's $1 million on the table. If I don't eat those almonds, I'm not doing it. You're going to become very clear in the evening about what emotion is there. Okay. So maybe last time it was just there was so much focus, or honestly, I'm sure that you felt stressed last time and you just like felt it. It's just in your brain, the memory of doing it was way easier than actually doing it today, right?
Right.
So lean into that, see what's there, and answer your questions that your brain gives you. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Anything else to add?
I don't think so. Thank
All
you
right.
so much for your time.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to thank you so much for being so willing to be vulnerable in the space so that everybody else can benefit from it. Because I think that this is a very, very common experience for women who are struggling with this. So I appreciate you so much.
You bet.